Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
The individual who used to document each day that he spent with Barbra Streisand is now confronting the most excruciating entries. James Brolin required 3 suggestions. He recently informed producers that he couldn't commit to anything before she said yes. At this moment, their individual bank accounts for the first time in decades shaved discreetly combined as growing medical expenses make borders impossible. The pair is currently facing their biggest challenge after commemorating their 25th wedding anniversary last year. Hollywood Brolin declined a $2 million role simply to remain at home. Sources murmur his life's next chapter might be the most tragic. Life almost destroyed him long before love found him. Under the July sun so intense they'd appeared to mark his arrival with pain. James Brolin was born as Craig Kenneth Brutterin amid a scorching heatwave on July 18, 1940 burned Los Angeles with temperatures as high as 103 degrees Fahrenheit. His dad, successful building constructor Henry Brutterin, arrived at the hospital in about 12 minutes before to Craig's birth. However, Henry was never late to the delivery room. Late for the occasion, he managed their home like a military installation. Craig was just 4 years old in 1944 when he was given a task list and graded every week. There was only quiet, chores, and no goodnight stories or lulla bibis, as well as the chilly math of discipline. Helen, his mother, used to be a movie extra and her dreams had been so deeply buried by Hollywood's silent age that she couldn't bear to witness them flourish once more. Even in her own child, she sealed off her history and it carried with it the support he may have had. In 1947's summer, when the walls literally closed in on Craig when he was 7 years old, his severe asthma episode lethal frame, resulting in 45 days in the hospital. As other boys, Craig caught his breath while playing outside in antiseptic holes where the only sound, the wheezing, was his own. He subsequently said, "It felt like my body was rejecting me," admitted. It was more than simply the sickness, though it was the seclusion. Just a lad in bed, no warmth, no visits, fear-stricken eyes and struggling lungs. Something was engraved that summer into him. It's a silent, desperate will to persevere, not weakness. However, there was a spark flickering somewhere inside that weak boy. 1949. When he was 9 years, Craig disassembled his father's wristwatch and expertly reassembled it. His teachers referred to him as gifted, but it wasn't metal or gears that saved him in the end. Celluloid was used. Craig watched James Dean in East of Eden in 1955, and it had a seismic effect. For 6 months in a row, he rode his bike 17 miles each Saturday to Griffith Park, imitating every move made by Dean. He muttered Dean's sentences to squirrels, trees, to himself. He was more than a fan, he was a follower. 73 cuttings that he concealed behind a poster in his room and spent all of his money, more than $200 from his paper route. On an 8mm used camera, he worked with local children to direct 24 silent films. See me, hear me, let me matter. Every frame is an appeal from the star-worshipping child. Observe the star's descent. Additionally, something inside him broke. James Dean's passing. Craig went silent for 11 days later that year. No sobs or outbursts, just quiet. His drama teacher was so alarmed by his intense anguish that she located owner of his movies and sent it to UCLA without telling him. An honorable mention was given to Admirable without a cause as director as Nicholas Ray. Something was ignited at that instant. Permanent, however. The path ahead would put all that illumination to the test. Every audition made him feel ill. Shadows accompanied every stride toward the spotlight, and he was so close to disappearing into thin air before anyone ever heard him. Forever quiet. Being an adult did not make his suffering go away, it just changed it to make hardships more difficult to bear and hopes more costly. As James Brolin, who was in his mid-20s at the time, entered Hollywood without any notice, but in terror. Tall, muscular, and dominating. He had the appearance but none of their relation. It seemed like a locked door behind every casting call. He was surrounded by individuals who resembled him but had luck, agents, or ancestry. He frequently, after waiting for hours, they were told, "You're not what we're looking for." For he would then drive his beaten Volkswagen Beetle after every rejection, returning to the parking space beneath the 7-Eleven where he spent months living shadows and quiet. "On some evenings I ate cold canned beans directly from," he once recounted in a rare late-night interview. "The 10 evenings I didn't eat at all, but I didn't allow myself to stop." That hunger fueling him both literally and emotionally. He eventually secured a background in 1965 role on Batman before being removed from the finished cut. Instead of failing, it was a pattern. Silently and stoically, Brolin gathered failures like scars, and without protests, he would whisper while lying in the back seat and gazing up at his car's roof in the darkest hours, lines to himself, drawn from sorrow and memories rather than from scripts. "Is anybody out? Are they listening?" In a journal, he once wrote, "If no one sees me, am I really real me?" However, Payne came up with fresh tactics to challenge him. In 1966, he eventually got a speaking part in a little television drama, but halfway through he was abruptly sacked. Filming his voice didn't appeal to the producer. Brolin, broken, humiliated, He pleaded for the half of his paycheck that we had not yet received. James sobbed as he stormed out when the producer refused. His pride and eyes were in ruins. He once more slept in his car that night, wrapped up in around another dead-end's emptiness. That evening, I ceased to be. He would later remark that he was afraid of failing since nothing could hurt more than failure. Attempting Brolin scrubbed dishes while others partied on Sunset Boulevard, afford to take acting classes. He imitated Clint and studied Marlon Brando relentlessly. Eastwood practiced lines out loud while squinting at himself in the mirror until his voice broken. In the shadow of Hollywood's opulence, he waged a personal battle, fighting poverty, self-doubt, and the awareness that his father might have been correct all along. When optimism seemed like a terrible joke, fortune intervened in the most surprising manner. He was observed practicing by a Universal Studios janitor, Shakespeare behind a garbage can. Someone the janitor knew. After a week, Brolin was summoned to take an exam. No magic was involved. It took some time. However, it was his, and it was a start. The result of that test was a minor recurring role on a drama in medicine. Although it didn't pay well, it provided him with something he hadn't felt in Nurse Momentum, and it brought with it a feeling of value not from praise, but from perseverance, from demonstrating to himself above all others that he could fit in prior to Barbra, the houses, or the renown. There was a young man, hawk-rumpled screenplay pages next to him, curled up in a car's back seat, and a heart too obstinate to give up. When it appeared that his Hollywood dreams were eternally doomed, a chance meeting rekindled the fire. Following years of being turned down, James It was the last straw for Brolin. He hardly had a fragrance to his name. He resided behind Fox Studios in his beaten Volkswagen. He took a bath in 8 from vending machines, took baths at the gym, and convinced himself that this torment was just temporary. However, days transformed into weeks and weeks of the kind of hopelessness that causes even the most resolute people to doubt their own value. There were times when I would look up at the studio gates and question whether I would ever enter for a purpose other than later admitted to taking a shower. Then came the job that was unrelated to preparing the vehicle of a Universal executive refused to start, and Brolin with us offered to fix it. Having a knack for mechanical grease-covered and sporting a borrowed shirt, he knelt like a man pleading for salvation beneath the hood. The executive saw something more, spark, in his modesty and grit. Brolin was asked to try out for a new post a few days later. Dr. Stephen, the writing for Kylie's role in Marcus Welby MD was medical, and it wasn't glamour or raw language, but Brolin put all of his energy into it. It seemed alien to read language, he once said, but each word felt like an opportunity to establish my legitimacy. He lived the lines, not simply read them. When his tape was shown to the producers, in addition to a physician, they examined a man who had experienced suffering and failure, and remained steadfast. Not only did that position transform his career, it also solved his existence. The show was successful, and Brolin is now at last on the opposite side of struggle. He took home the Primetime Emmy for Best Supporting Actor, when he gripped the statue with shaking hands when his name was announced that evening, not fourth prize itself, as well as what it stood for. Each restless night, every shut door and every prayer spoken into a parking lot's quiet vehicle. He later admitted to an interviewer, "I was this close to giving up," while holding 2 hardly separated fingers. "Had I not fixed that vehicle, you might be speaking with a mechanic as opposed to an actor." It wasn't luck though, it was his steadfast determination, his ability to persevere when all doors banged. His ascent was quick and difficult, but it was authentic and demonstrated a strong point. Detours can occasionally be used to hide the route to destiny, and the source of the key to your future could be found in a stranger's vehicle. At last he found fame, but it didn't take out the shadows. All it did was make them stand out more. As Dr. Marcus Welby turned into a phenomenon on television. Magazine covers featured the visage of James Brolin. His name reverberated in American homes. He was the epitome of achievement. Attractive, successful, well-liked, flooded with offers, feature films, endorsements, honors. He had made it from the outside. However, life behind the scenes was coming apart. Silent dinners and long shoots were causing his first marriage to deteriorate. When he returned home, he found a boy who frequently inquired as to why his father was constantly gone. "I was watching my family fall apart while I was pursuing a career," he later said. Admitted, "I didn't know how to stop it," which was the worst part. At the top he felt more alone than ever because of his celebrity. There was a dream about the studio lights. Now appeared to make him oblivious to the important things. He made an effort to fill the void with his job, playing part after part, and losing himself in the sets and scripts. But the cheers started to reverberate, eerie and hollow. In his own time, admitted to friends how oppressive the demand to remain current was. He feared that he would disappear as fast as he had appeared. "Success is intended to cure you," he stated in a follow-up interview. However, occasionally it just inserts your injuries in the spotlight. Despite his accolades, the pain inside he became more profound. Despite his admirers, he yearned for intimacy. Although he had parts he lacked tranquility, many nights were spent gazing at the ceiling, wondering if he was fleeing from something or striving for greatness. Void, unnoticed by cameras and unheard by fans. It was a silent crisis, and maybe that's why it stung so much. The world was silently losing the guy they had celebrated. Separate. Nevertheless, in the haze of celebrity and personal hardship, Roland looked for roles that enabled him to channel that suffering into something worthwhile. In Skyjacked he played a tortured veteran whose psyche had fallen apart, a figure that reflected the disorder he occasionally experienced within. Westworld followed, where he portrayed an eerie metaphor of a thrill-seeking visitor being pursued by lifelike machinery. For how notoriety can turn itself around. These weren't merely shows, they were thoughts, reverberations of his personal struggles. However, one part came with Akil on its own. As Brolin was reading the Amityville horror script, said that a book abruptly dropped to the ground from a neighboring shelf. He didn't believe in the paranormal, but he was paused by the occasion. He subsequently recounted with a dry voice, "I took it as a sign." Chuckle. After he agreed to the role, the movie became a box office success. His uneasiness manifested itself in one of his most captivating performances. In a later, brief but noteworthy appearance in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, he displayed a lighter side, his keen sense of humor, and his readiness to make fun of himself advertising. But he discovered a unique steadiness in the Hotel series. Not in addition to being the star, he directed a number of episodes both creatively and financially fulfilled. It was one of the rare times in his career when the cheers no longer reverberated. It was consoling. The road was still uneven, but Brolin had started to take back his story. Not only as a celebrity, but also as a person who bravely turned his suffering into a purpose, one part at a time. If James Brolin silently endured life's hardships and rose to greatness by constant grit, then Barbra Streisand flashed like a storm through hers. Born into heartache, growing up in the dark, and rising not only to stay alive but also to rule a world that wasn't intended for her. When she was just 15 months old, a tragedy occurred. Emmanuel Strayand, her father, died unexpectedly. 4 years later, she was told a falsehood. She whispered that he passed away from tiredness. Mother to mellow, a reality that is too harsh for a child. The truth, Rebbe led, was harsh only much later. An injection gone wrong during a seizure caused by epilepsy had taken him away from her. Therefore, lullabies were not part of her early memories, or stories before bed, but without sound. There was only absence, no remembrance. One day, Barbra remembered, with a mother emotionally paralyzed by Barbara's early years were marked by grief and antidepressants. Isolation. When Barbra was 7 years old, her mother secretly remarried. The individual ended up becoming her stepfather. Didn't try to conceal his contempt. However, she called him dad and got his slippers, but all she got was a blank stare. Without a living room or privacy, their small Brooklyn flat was more of archage as opposed to a house. It wasn't until she was 16 that she had a bedroom. Each evening she whispered dreams into the darkness, while living in small quarters with her mother and older brother in the city. Raged outside their flimsy paper walls. She frequently stated that the necessity of individuals, she started to want 4 closets more than gowns because she was so starved for room. Even Diana, her mother, found it difficult to show love. She never claimed to be pleased about myself. "I never said, 'I love you,'" told Barbra years later. The poverty was not as severe as emotional neglect. Barbra left home at the age of 16. To her mother dropped off soup and fruit to pursue a goal that no one believed in. Yet not a word of encouragement. "I was forced to have faith in myself. Nobody else did." The sentimental everything was formed by hunger. Her intense self-reliance, her meticulousness, her yearning for approval from the quiet of others around you as well as from their clapping you questioned her once. Music provided her with a moment's escape. Long before Broadway, young Barbra would sing to her bedroom's walls, or what appeared to be one, when lights found her. Channeling only, she could hear loneliness being transformed into lobbies. Instead, she joined the school choir to feel less invisible but to be seen. Instructors observed her remarkable capacity to feel every word, to sing as if her soul had been longing for a listener for years. A music instructor informed her she spoke with a voice that was a contradiction wrapped in power and agony. Velvet. Nevertheless, it was precisely this void that made room for Barbra's suffering turned into her strength, her desire, and her palate. What she made up for her lack of comfort by improving her vision. She sang with every note, holding geckos of her unfulfilled desires. Each performance is a protest against the quiet of her childhood. Despite her past, she did not rise. She got up because of it. When asked later in life what made her unique, Barbra would respondingly saying, "Maybe I was just too wounded to quit, but this was only the start of a profession. A force was being born." Barbra Streisand refrained from launching into fame, one painful note at a time. She battled her way toward it. At 16, she left that stuffy Brooklyn apartment with only a voice, a suitcase, and a head full of unresolved anguish, shivering with fire and terror. She was not greeted warmly by the city. She sang in smoky tones while crashing on friends' couches as she toured the alleys of New York. The microphone shrieked more often than the audience cheered, and the basement. Her stomach ached from hunger, but not nearly as much as the pain of buying. Nevertheless, she sang not for attention or fame. Money, but because the only place where she felt fully alive was in her voice. It wasn't bravery, it was survival, she reportedly remarked, and that survival brought her to her unusual appearance, led to her being rejected by casting directors at numerous auditions. And producers advised her, told her everything about her, including her name and nose. However, she refused. Each and every door that was banged simply made her determination stronger. She carried her tears into each performance, allowing her suffering to seep into each line, her defiance into each and every note. She participated in a talent show at a homosexuality Bonswist and left the crowd speechless. From then on, rumors about the girl with the eerie voice began to circulate around subterranean communities. Her tone wasn't just strong and sublime, it startled even experienced producers who had fired her only a moment ago. The same unadulterated skill recorded on a crude in 1961 a tape recorder would cause a friend to drop their glass in shock, and business leaders said that the demo was phony. 14 experts emphasized that no inexperienced gay woman could control her voice like that. They claimed that the voice had to be designed. No, it wasn't. Barbra was the one. On stage in a $6 secondhand shop in 1960 attire, she performed in front of an astonished audience at her debut nightclub show. 5 continuous minutes of applause. She didn't require any sequence, spotlight. All she required was her courage, her pain, and her voice. Within a club, she was the only artist to ever obtain a flawless score, despite her known tendency to withhold praise. Her name, as Shethought, must have been as unique as her. Thus, she failed to get the second A in Barbra. It was a silent protest, a modest act of defiance for individuality. The sector made fun of her, a 5-cent face and a $1 million voice. She didn't give in, though. She never softened her ambition or fixed her nose. She remained resolute and broke through. Funny Girl followed. She did 867 gigs between 1964 and 1967. She gave her all to Fanny Brice night after night until the boundaries between reality and role became hazy. When Hollywood expressed interest in turning the musical into a film in 1968, she became a phenomenon rather than a curiosity. However, despite being at the forefront of cinematic history, she had to deal with the burden of skepticism and expectation. Would the big screen accept her unconventional beauty screen? Would Hollywood shine through her Brooklyn dirt? She didn't simply respond to their inquiries. She destroyed them. Her first movie role brought her in her 1969 Academy Award. Tie with the renowned Katharine Hepburn solidified her status as a powerful woman as well, strong enough to be disregarded. However, success did not soften the scrutiny, or every action. Her self-assurance, her decisions, and her silence were examined and criticized. She was described as demanding, unpleasant, and overly assertive. However, she continued in the 1972 film What's Up Doc, 1973, The Way We Were in particular, and 1976's Star is Born. She produced rather than only acting. She influenced stories and managed her reputation. The song Evergreen took home the She became the first woman in history to win the 1977 Academy Award for Best Original Song, triumph in that particular category. She was doing more than just shattering glass ceilings. She was constructing new floors so that people might stand on them. Continue. Her struggles intensified behind the scenes. For 15 years, starting in the late, she battled to make Yentl a reality from the 1960s to the beginning of the 1980s. Produce, star in, write, and direct. She was rejected by studio after studio. She received a Golden Globe for Best Actress when the movie eventually came out in 1983. The first female director. However, she wasn't even nominated by the Academy. It was an overwhelming snub. In a ridiculous turn of events, the Golden Globes produced a new category solely to recognize her efforts. The greatest director of a comedy or musical, only to, next year, remove it. Barbra had pushed for change just to observe the sector, run away from her might. Nevertheless, she continued to ascend with The Prince of Tides, 1991, as well as her 1994 HBO concert special. She became the first woman to win the Directors Guild of America Award. She also made an appearance in the infamous movie Nuts, 1987, and demonstrated to the public her versatility as a performer. Wasn't Finheit. Her internal struggle, however, was possibly the most taxing. In spite of her world-beating stardom, stage nervousness so severely plagued her that she stopped performing live from 1967 till her return. A span of 27 years. In the middle of the 1990s, she was paralyzed by dread, not because she didn't want to sing. In interviews, she subsequently acknowledged that even praise caused worry. A harsh ironic for someone who was destined for the limelight. When she eventually came back, it wasn't merely a performance, it was a triumph, not over crowds, but a reclaiming of power but above herself. This was not a profession. A revolution took place. Streisand Barbra didn't merely put up with the attention. She changed its shape. She didn't expect to be respected. She rendered disdain meaningless. Each and every rebuke, rejection, and locked door turned into a stepping stone. She did not inherit her success. It was sketched note by note from suffering, tenacity, and a resolute unwillingness to vanish, and throughout it all, she never sought approval to be exceptional. She just was. Within her Eve even called a lot of names, some complimentary, some not, according to the statement. However, Ivy always recognized who I am. Her voice and those words are clear, honest, rebellious, and completely remarkable. Music. Although James had been looking for Barbra at Fort Storms for a peaceful place to lay his broken heart, under the glaring spotlight, both worn out and scarred, but still carrying a glimmer of hope. Thus, when destiny ultimately brought with them together, it wasn't simply love. Two seasoned souls were finding solace in one another. For so long the world had denied them. In 1996 they started dating. 28 failed dates in a year, each serving as a reminder to Barbra Streisand that genuine connection was still elusive. James Brolin was also not anticipating a lot. He was about to meet another woman when he decided against it. Final minute. Their lives were completely changed by just one decision. Their initial and uneasy quiet could have terminated the meeting. Unimpressed by his hair, Barbra simply said, "Who did your hair?" It could have been catastrophic, but for it was a flash of insight. James, he sensed something in her incisive candor. Uncommon, someone who saw him for who he really was, not simply how the world portrayed him. That the disarming moment served as the catalyst for an exceptional event. Their affection wasn't slick or quick. It was constructed methodically, painstakingly, and with great take care. Before Barbra answered yes, James made 3 proposals. On his third try, he expressed his feelings to her in a 24-page handwritten letter. At last she agreed, and they spent $1.4 million on a private, very intimate wedding in 1998 million, but only those closest to them were present. It has nothing to do with show. It had to do with sanctuary. The space was silent and glistening with candlelight. Happiness, a universe apart from the glamour of Hollywood, and a representation of the kind of love that begs just being there. James's connection was improving in ways that nobody else could observe. He had been plagued by persistent sleeplessness for 27 years until the 642 evenings before their nuptials, during which he discovered peaceful slumber. Love in its purest form was that constant, silent comfort. Every night, while listening to soft conversation or just Barbra's breathing next to him, his thoughts found peace at last. In exchange, Barbra composed a song specifically for their wedding, a personal hymn to peace and promise. James also took her by surprise by learning to play the piano version of Barbra's Lullaby, a tune that encapsulated the she had brought calm into his life. This was not a big or public exchange. It was gentle, thoughtful, and poignant, the soundtrack of a love tale that didn't require applause, just comprehension. It was never about speed on their quest. It was about depth. Every action they did was infused with trust that was gradually gained, such as creating a whole by piecing together 2 broken hearts. In a world obsessed, their romance masked a deeper reality. That sincere love doesn't require showmanship. It simply requires patience, deference, and the fortitude to stick around. There was no climax to their marriage. It served as a base, and that holy connection would only grow stronger in the years that followed. Their union, distant from a typical Hollywood couple, developed into a haven based on mutual respect as well as affection. Respect, self-reliance, and an unwritten agreement to work through life's challenges together. James and Barbra decided to keep their money apart in their Malibu retreat, a gesture of autonomy rather than distancing, a way to respect the lives they had created together before. However, what really symbolized their union wasn't a joint account or extravagant displays. It was a $35,000 custom-designed mattress they playfully dubbed the boardroom bed. It was more than just a place of rest. It was their headquarters for life. Regarding the soft surface, they scrolled notebook pages, composed music, discussed their aspirations, and planned out charitable endeavors. The area was where Barbra wrote a cocoon of intimacy and creation, where James whispered plot ideas and melodies. The marriage was put to the test in a fresh way, while the outside world descended into turmoil. One another day after day for 400 nights in a row. Most couples may break up. Such constant closeness. Yet James and Barbra prospered. They finished 3/7 puzzles together, accumulated 278 pages of collective contemplations, and when conflicts simmered, they did not quarrel. They strolled peacefully about their house till the air became clear. Instead of using loud voices to resolve disputes, they used coordinated foots. It was a beautiful lesson in patience that demonstrated the love of 2 devoted hearts. 2. Keeping the peace. Barbra was still evolving in the middle of this subdued domesticity. The entire world. As she grew older, her dedication to advocacy remained unwavering. It grew more intense. Concerned about the dearth of women's focused medical research, she led a national initiative to protect women's hearts,